On my wedding day, my parents demanded I remove my husband from the guest list or they would walk out. I took a deep breath and said, okay, then leave. My mother gasped, you would choose him over us? I smiled and said, watch me. They were speechless when. Weddings are supposed to be about love, unity, and family coming together to celebrate. But for me, my wedding was the day I finally chose myself, something I had never been allowed to do before. I should have known things would go south the moment my parents showed up that morning, faces tight with disapproval, their energy radiating tension. My mother, in a crisp navy blue dress, she made a big deal about being more elegant than my own wedding gown, clutched her pearls like she was preparing for war. My father stood beside her, his arms crossed, his mouth a thin, disapproving line. They barely acknowledged the venue, the gorgeous barn-style reception hall my fiancé and I had spent months choosing, with fairy lights draped across the beams and fresh white roses lining the aisles. No, they weren't interested in the details. They had only one mission that day, to control me, as they always had. And that's exactly what they tried to do. I was standing in the bridal suite, makeup half done, dress still hanging on the door, when they stormed in. My mother's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of wedding preparations. We need to talk, she said. I knew that tone. I had spent my whole life obeying it. But not today. Make it quick, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She looked at my father, who simply nodded, then turned back to me with an expression so severe it made my stomach drop. We need you to remove James from the guest list. My fiancé. The man I loved. The man I was about to marry. For a moment, I actually thought I misheard her. I blinked. What? My father sighed like I was a child refusing to listen. We gave you plenty of time to come to your senses. He is not right for you, and we will not support this marriage. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sheer audacity of it all was mind-blowing. You do realize he's not just on the guest list, right? He's the groom. My mother's lips curled in disgust, and she let out a dramatic sigh. Then we won't stay. If you marry him, we walk out. No discussion. The room went dead silent. My maid of honor, my cousin Sophie, froze in place, holding a curling iron in one hand. My makeup artist looked between us, her brush hovering midair. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of their ultimatum sink in. Then, I exhaled and said, okay, then leave. My mother gasped so loudly you would have thought I had just confessed to murder. You would choose him over us? She demanded, her voice shrill. I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I had never felt so certain about anything in my life. Watch me. She stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. My father, ever the composed one, narrowed his eyes. Don't be ridiculous. We're your parents. And James is my future, I said simply. If you don't want to be part of it, I won't force you. I could see the panic creeping into my mother's face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to cry, beg them to stay, promise to obey. But I didn't. And that's when she did something I will never forget. She scoffed, took a step closer, and said in the coldest voice I had ever heard, you'll regret this. When he leaves you, don't come running back to us. I didn't flinch. I just looked her in the eye and said, if you walk out that door, you won't have to worry about me coming back at all. The air between us was thick with unspoken battles, years of silent suffering, of always being the obedient daughter, the one who never made waves. But not today. Today I chose me. Without another word, my mother spun on her heel and stormed out. My father hesitated for half a second, maybe expecting me to call him back. But when I didn't, he followed her. The room stayed silent for a long time. Then Sophie let out a low whistle. Damn, she muttered. Did not see that coming. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It hurt, of course. It hurt in a way I couldn't describe. But it also felt freeing. James and I got married that day. And when I walked down the aisle, I didn't look for my parents. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't seeking their approval. I was finally free. But what I didn't know then was that my parents weren't done with their games. Not by a long shot. And their next move? It was something I never could have seen coming. The wedding went on without them. And to be honest, it was beautiful. James and I danced under the warm glow of fairy lights, surrounded by people who actually loved us. My cousin Sophie gave the funniest, most heartfelt speech. My in-laws were beaming with pride. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells, constantly waiting for my parents' approval. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The honeymoon surprise a week later, James and I were in the Maldives, soaking up the sun, drinking cocktails by the water, and just enjoying the peace. No drama, no guilt, just us. Until the hotel manager knocked on our door. Mrs. Dawson? He asked, looking hesitant. I frowned. Yes, we, received a call from your parents earlier today. They said there was an emergency and asked for your room number. I froze. James, lying on the bed with a book, sat up instantly. What? They claimed there was a family crisis and that you needed to call them immediately, the manager explained, shifting uncomfortably. But when we asked for details, they got aggressive. Of course, they did. I forced a smile. Thank you for letting me know. If they call again, please tell them I'm unavailable. The manager nodded and left, but my mood had already soured. James sighed. They just won't stop, will they? They never do, I muttered. But what I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The inheritance bombshell 2 weeks later, we came home, expecting to settle into married life. Instead, I was greeted with a letter. A very official-looking letter. It was from a lawyer. Confused, I opened it and started reading. And that's when my stomach dropped. My parents had cut me out of their will. Not just that, they had left everything to my younger brother, Daniel. Every last cent. Now, I need to be clear, I never expected a dime from them. Money was never the issue. But the way they worded it? That's what hit me. Due to our daughter's poor life choices and blatant disrespect for her family, she is no longer part of our legacy. This decision is final. Final. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. James took it from me, reading over my shoulder. His jaw clenched. Wow! I let out a short, bitter laugh. I shouldn't be surprised. But deep down, it stung. Because it wasn't just about the money, it was about them making sure I knew I was nothing to them anymore. And the worst part? My brother knew. Daniel's betrayal a few days later, Daniel called me. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, he was reaching out to say he disagreed with them. That he didn't want their money if it meant cutting me off. I was wrong. You really screwed up, you know that? He said, his voice dripping with smugness. I gritted my teeth. Excuse me? They did what they had to do. You chose him over them. Actions have consequences. My blood ran cold. And you're okay with this? He chuckled. Of course I am. You made your bed. Now lie in it. I could have argued. I could have yelled. But I didn't. Instead, I just exhaled and said, enjoy the money, Daniel. And then I hung up. The social smear campaign, if they had stopped there, I could have walked away and never looked back. But my mother? She wasn't done yet. A week later, I started getting messages. From old friends. From extended family. Even from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them saying the same thing. I can't believe you abandoned your parents after everything they did for you. Wow, you didn't even invite them to your own wedding? That's cold. I saw your mother's post. She's heartbroken. How could you? Confused, I checked Facebook. And there it was. A long, dramatic post from my mother, painting herself as the victim. We raised her, gave her everything, and in the end, she threw us away like trash. She wouldn't even let us come to her wedding. Imagine the pain of watching your only daughter betray you like this. Some people will never understand a parent's sacrifice. Thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments, all supporting her. And me? I was the villain. My next move, I could have stayed quiet. I could have let her win. But after everything they had done? No, not this time. So I did the one thing they never expected. I told the truth. Publicly. I typed out a long, brutally honest post. I explained everything from the ultimatum at my wedding to the inheritance stunt, to Daniel's betrayal and the social media games. And then I ended it with, you wanted the world to hear your side, Mom. Now they've heard mine. Then I hit post. And that's when the real chaos began. When I hit post, I expected backlash. I expected my parents to double down, for Daniel to throw another smug message my way. What I didn't expect. The truth unraveling in ways I never saw coming. At first, it was the usual chaos, comments flooding in, people picking sides. Some relatives reached out privately, saying they knew my parents were controlling but never realized how bad it was. Others told me to be the bigger person and make peace. But then something changed. Someone posted a comment that made my heart stop. I don't know if you remember me, but I used to work for your dad. You might want to look into where all that inheritance money is actually going. I stared at the screen. James leaned over my shoulder, reading it too. What the hell does that mean? I had no idea. But I was about to find out. The family fortune that never existed, it started with a phone call. I reached out to an old family friend, someone who had known my parents for years but had distanced themselves recently. Let's call him Mr. Carter. When I asked about the inheritance, he hesitated. Then he sighed and said, I don't think there's any money left to give. I froze. What? I've heard rumors, he continued. Your dad made some bad business decisions. Real bad. Lost a lot. But he's too proud to admit it. I felt my stomach twist. So you're telling me, they cut me off from an inheritance that doesn't even exist? I can't say for sure, he admitted. But if I were you, I'd start digging. And that's exactly what I did. The debt they tried to hide. James helped me go through public records, business filings, anything we could get our hands on. And what we found? Shocking. My father had taken out multiple loans against their assets. Several of his business ventures had failed. And worst of all, he had been sued, twice, for unpaid debts. The family wealth they flaunted? Gone. I sat there, staring at the proof, my hands trembling. They had cut me off for choosing James over family, but the truth? They needed a scapegoat. If they could make me the villain, they wouldn't have to admit they had lost everything. Daniel's panic call. Not even 24 hours later, my phone rang. Daniel. I debated ignoring it, but something in me wanted to hear what he had to say. The moment I picked up, he snapped. What the hell did you do? I leaned back in my chair. What are you talking about? You put all our family's business out there, he hissed. Mom and Dad are furious. I scoffed. Oh, so now you care about the truth? You don't understand, he shot back. The money, he stopped. And that's when it hit me. He already knew. I went cold. You knew there was no inheritance, didn't you? Silence. Then, quietly, it wasn't supposed to come out like this. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course it wasn't. Turns out, my parents had been feeding him lies too, promising him wealth that no longer existed, keeping him loyal by making him believe I was the only one who needed to be cut off. And now? His golden ticket was gone. My mother's last-ditch effort after my post went viral, my parents went silent. No more Facebook rants. No public smear campaigns. Just nothing. Until my mother sent me a text. We need to talk. Urgent. I ignored it. An hour later, another message. Please. Just meet me. One time. I showed James. She's up to something. He nodded. Be careful. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her, but on my terms. A public place. A small cafe downtown. No way I was stepping into their house. When she walked in, she looked different. Not her usual pristine, put-together self. She looked nervous. She sat down across from me, her hands gripping her purse like it was the only thing keeping her together. I didn't come here to fight, she said. I just want to fix this. I stared at her, waiting. Then she dropped her bombshell. Your father and I need money. I almost choked on my coffee. Excuse me? Her lips pressed together. Things are difficult right now. We thought Daniel could handle things, but he's not ready. And you have a stable life. A good marriage. You could help us. I blinked. They disowned me. Humiliated me. Lied to me. And now they wanted my help? I leaned forward. Let me get this straight. You cut me out of your will. You tried to turn my own family against me. You spread lies about me online. And now, you're asking for my money? She had the audacity to look offended. You owe us that much. After everything we gave you. I let out a slow breath. Then I smiled. And said, watch me walk away. And I did. But this wasn't over. Because what I found out next, it was worse than I ever imagined. I thought that was it. I thought walking out on my mother at the cafe was the final blow. But I was wrong. Because my parents? They weren't just broke. They were drowning in debt. And they had done something unforgivable to try and save themselves. The final betrayal, it started with a phone call from an unknown number. I usually ignore them, but something in my gut told me to answer. Is this Mrs. Dawson? The voice asked. Yes, I said hesitantly. This is Detective Harris with the Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you regarding your parents. My blood went cold. James saw my face and immediately walked over. What's wrong? I put the phone on speaker. I'm listening. The detective sighed. I'll be blunt. Your parents have been under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. They took out multiple loans under false pretenses and defaulted on them. And we have reason to believe they attempted to take out a loan under your name. My heart stopped. What? I whispered. We're still gathering evidence, but they used your social security number and personal information to apply for a high-limit loan 6 months ago. It was denied, but the attempt was flagged. James swore under his breath. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. You're telling me my own parents tried to steal from me? The detective hesitated. I understand this is a lot to take in. We'd like you to come in to discuss your options. I barely remember the rest of the call. My mind was racing. They tried to take out a loan in my name. They had already lost everything, and they were willing to steal from their own daughter to keep up their facade. I felt sick. The confrontation, I didn't wait. I drove straight to their house. I wasn't going to let them manipulate their way out of this. Not this time. When I arrived, my father answered the door. The moment he saw my face, his expression darkened. We're not doing this here, he said flatly. Oh, we are, I snapped, pushing past him. My mother was in the living room, acting like nothing was wrong. The TV was on, and she was sipping tea like her world wasn't about to collapse. She barely looked at me. I assume you got my messages. I laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh. No, but I did get a call from the police. That got her attention. I watched as the color drained from her face. What? What are you talking about? I turned to my father. They know. About the fraud. About the loans. And they know you tried to steal from me. His nostrils flared, but he didn't deny it. Of course, he didn't. My mother, on the other hand, had the audacity to look offended. We were going to pay it back. My vision blurred with rage. That's your defense. You stole my identity, you lied, and you expect me to believe you would have just given it back. She stood up, smoothing her dress, trying to regain control. You don't understand, no, you don't understand. I roared. You spent my entire life trying to control me. You walked out on my wedding because I didn't obey you. You cut me out of your life just to turn around and steal from me. And for what? To keep up your perfect image? To lie to people a little longer. Silence. Then, my father exhaled sharply and sat down, rubbing his temples. He knew it was over. My mother, though? She couldn't let it go. She scoffed. You're being dramatic. Do you think people don't help their families in hard times? You're being selfish. I gasped at the sheer audacity. Selfish? Are you actually out of your mind? She crossed her arms. If you weren't so stubborn, none of this would have happened. You owe us after everything we did for you. And instead, you run off with that man and abandon us. James, this was never really about money. It was never about family. This was about control. She would rather steal from me, ruin me financially, destroy my life before ever admitting she was wrong. And that's when I realized there was nothing left to salvage. The aftermath, I walked out of that house and never looked back. I went straight to the police station and filed every report they needed. Fraud. Identity theft. Everything. A few weeks later, I got the news. My parents had been officially charged. My father took a plea deal. He admitted to everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. My mother? She denied it to the bitter end. She called me, sobbing, begging, threatening. I didn't answer. Daniel, ever the spineless golden child, tried to convince me to fix this, to bail them out. I blocked him. And just like that, my parents lost everything. Closure and reflection. It's been over a year now. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt. Losing your family, even a toxic one, leaves scars. There were nights I cried, wondering if I had done the right thing. But then I remember the years of manipulation, the lies, the moment they chose money over me. And I realize I didn't lose a family. I freed myself from a prison. James has been my rock through it all. We built a life without their shadows looming over us. And the best part? I have no regrets. Because for the first time in my life, I chose me. And I'll never apologize for that.